Imagine you wake up tomorrow in a human tribe 50,000 years ago. No cities, no schools, no governments, no wedding rings, no marriage certificates, no words like husband or wife. You look around the campfire and realize something strange. The rules you take for granted today might not exist at all. Who belonged to whom? Who raised the children? Who decided who could stay together? And perhaps the strangest question of all, when did humans start choosing one partner instead of many? Because for most of history, nobody was keeping records, no photographs, no books, no written laws, just people trying to survive. And the answer turns out to be far stranger than most people imagine. For nearly 99% of human history, humans didn't live in cities. They lived in small tribes. Most groups contained only a few dozen people. Everyone knew everyone. Every face was familiar. Every meal depended on teamwork. A single person couldn't survive alone for very long. Life was difficult. Food was never guaranteed. Storms could destroy shelters. Predators could appear without warning. Injuries that seem minor today could become deadly. Survival depended on cooperation, not wealth, not status, not technology. And because life was so uncertain, human relationships may have looked very different from what we expect today. Many anthropologists believe early human groups were often much more flexible in how relationships were formed. There wasn't a worldwide rule book. Different groups likely had different customs. Some may have preferred long-term pairs. Others may have been far less structured. The truth is, we simply don't know every detail. But we do know one thing. Human beings evolved long before formal marriage existed, which raises a fascinating question. If marriage didn't create families, what did? To answer that question, we have to look at babies. Human babies are strange. Compared with many animals, they're incredibly dependent. A baby deer can stand within hours. A baby horse can walk on its first day. But a human baby, it takes years before it can survive independently. Years. That creates a huge challenge because raising a child requires enormous amounts of time, food, protection, and energy. And this may be one reason humans developed strong, long-term bonds. Not because someone invented marriage, but because cooperation helped children survive. Imagine a harsh winter thousands of years ago. Food is scarce. Temperatures are falling. Every day is a struggle. A child with multiple adults helping to protect and feed them has a better chance of reaching adulthood. Over thousands of generations, behaviors that improved survival tended to stick around. The result? Humans became one of the most social species on Earth. We don't just survive in groups. We depend on them. And that dependence may have shaped the earliest forms of pair bonding long before any official marriage existed. But then something happened. Something that would completely transform human society. Humans stopped moving and started staying in one place. Around 12,000 years ago, a revolution began. Not with kings, not with armies, not with religion, with seeds. People discovered that certain plants could be grown intentionally. Instead of constantly following food could be brought closer to home. Agriculture changed everything. Villages appeared, then larger settlements, then entire civilizations. For the first time in history, people began accumulating things: land, animals, tools, storage buildings, resources. And whenever valuable things exist, a new question appears. Who owns them? Before farming, ownership was often simpler. People moved frequently. There wasn't much to inherit. But once families settled on land, suddenly inheritance became important. Parents wanted their children to receive what they had built, and that changed how societies thought about family structures. Rules started appearing. Customs developed. Traditions formed. What had once been flexible became increasingly organized. The idea of officially recognized partnerships became more useful, not just emotionally, economically, socially, politically. Civilizations were beginning to create systems, and those systems would eventually evolve into something recognizable today: marriage. But the story doesn't end there. Because even after marriage appeared, different societies around the world continued to do things in very different ways, and some of those differences were astonishing. So when did marriage actually begin? Not in one place, and not all at once. Marriage wasn't invented by a single civilization. It appeared in different forms across the ancient world. As villages grew into cities, and cities grew into civilizations, societies began creating rules about family, inheritance, and partnership. Some of the earliest written evidence comes from ancient Mesopotamia. Thousands of years ago, people were already writing agreements about marriage, property, and family obligations. But these marriages often looked very different from modern ones. Many were less about romance and more about stability, about land, about resources, about alliances between families. In other words, marriage was becoming a social technology, a way to organize society. But there was one problem. Not everyone followed the same rules, and that's where things become interesting. Throughout history, many societies practiced monogamy, one man, one woman, but others allowed polygyny, where one man could have multiple wives. Why? The answer usually wasn't romance. It was resources. In many ancient societies, supporting a large family required enormous wealth. More land, more food, more animals, more workers. Only a small minority of men could actually afford multiple wives. Kings, chiefs, powerful leaders, wealthy landowners. Meanwhile, most ordinary people often formed one-to-one partnerships, not because of laws, but because resources were limited. Think about it. If one powerful man had 10 wives, that leaves fewer potential partners for everyone else. Over time, societies had to deal with this imbalance, and some discovered something surprising. As civilizations became larger, many societies found that widespread monogamy created stability. Families became easier to organize. Inheritance became clearer. Competition between powerful families was reduced. Children often benefited from having consistent support. This didn't happen everywhere. And it didn't happen overnight, but across centuries. Monogamy gradually became more common in many parts of the world, not because humans suddenly changed, but because certain systems worked better for large, complex societies. And that's important to remember. Marriage wasn't created in a single moment. It evolved. Just like languages evolve, just like cultures evolve, just like people evolve. And now, we arrive at the strangest part of the story. The thing most people never think about. If you travel back 50,000 years, the people sitting around those campfires would still recognize something familiar. Not wedding rings, not legal documents, not marriage certificates. Something older. Human connection. The desire to belong. To trust, to cooperate, to build a future with other people. Marriage changed throughout history. The rules changed. The customs changed. The definitions changed. But the need for human bonds that existed long before civilization, long before farming, possibly long before marriage itself. Which means the real story isn't about when humans invented marriage. It's about why humans kept forming connections, even before anyone gave those connections a name. And perhaps that's why this question is so fascinating. Because hidden inside the history of marriage is the history of being human. So the next time you see a wedding ring, remember something strange. That symbol may be ancient, but the instincts that helped create it are far older. Older than cities, older than kingdoms, older than written history. And they began around campfires long before anyone ever called themselves a husband or a wife.